£85 towards Christmas. We could, and it's something I think is probably worth doing. This is an issue that is probably worth doing a petition and making sure that we get active and we get people saying enough is enough. Enough of
the cuts that you're putting through that have hit pensioners, that have already hit the under 25s. We've had that debate only a week or two before where we tried to reverse that decision, which hits single parents and now which hits those on disabilities. And we know that, of course, ultimately all taxpayers and lower to middle earners in our society will be hit anyway, because that's the course that this government has chartered, is to put the tax on those who are least able to pay, because they won't tax those who are most able to pay, and they won't even ask them to do that. That's how the gentleman's agreement goes that they've negotiated for themselves. Before I hand over to Leslie, because this is about real people, it's not simply about politicians talking about abstract ideas, and I think many of you will have seen Leslie already, whether it's in the JP or in the local television media or on the radio, talking about his experiences. He was there minding his own business. He didn't create the financial deficit, he didn't create the black hole like many of you out there, but he is the one suffering the consequences of it, even though he has very little or nothing in terms of disposable income, and he is least able to shoulder the burden of those cuts. Yet it is people like Leslie, it's people like X, Y and Z that we've been in contact with, who have contacted us, men and women in our island, young and old, who are feeling the brunt of these cuts, and that's a political choice. Austerity is always a political choice. It doesn't have to be this way. The biggest lie that we're told is that there is no alternative, so the message that we must go home with tonight is that there certainly is an alternative, and it's called a fair model of progressive taxation, which actually looks after the people in society. Just two ideas perhaps that I'd like to talk about is the idea of the social contract. What we've seen in the last, particularly in the last month, but I think progressively in the last years, is a dismantling of the implicit social contract which has been there. That is to say that in a decent, affluent and relatively, and I think civilised society, you do have an agreement with your citizens when you elect a government. First of all, you need a government has a presumed legitimacy. It can't rule without our say-so, and when we withdraw that consent from them, then they need to consider their position. I understand that only in the last few hours in Romania they've had protesting on the streets because of government corruption, which led to a fire, if I heard correctly, and it started off with a small demonstrations, soon snowballed into 25,000 people on the street, initially asking for the mayor to resign, and it's led to the Prime Minister having to stand down. That's what I understood. I apologise if that's not correct, but and that's what happens when people actually take to the streets and say we're not happy. And perhaps that is something that needs to be considered by the Jersey community if actually the ballot box is insufficient or the next ballot isn't until 2.5 years. Of course we need to organise, but there are no doubt other things which individuals and collectives might wish to consider to get their message across, all within the parameters of the law, I'm sure. The second is, and I'll finish on this point, is one of solidarity. Because when one person in our community hurts, I believe that we should all be hurting, especially in a community the size of Jersey where it's so immediately interlinked. We don't have to be a pensioner to feel the suffering and to know that cuts affect pensioners. We do not have to be a single parent to know that a few pounds less a week, £10, £12 a week, will have a significant impact on individuals and the children in that family unit. It will have a wider implication for society. We don't need to be an under 25, although most of us, I think, at some point will have been, or all of us will have been under 25 if we're not already. I think even Sam's I'm not sure. 24, there you go, those were the days. So we don't all need to be at that age to know and have sympathy and empathise, and I think that's the point. And there will be attempts, of course, and sometimes where our own worst enemy when we actually direct our energies and our anger, and sometimes it's false anger because we don't actually know all the situation, at other individuals perhaps in different parts of the world, or our neighbours, when all of our actual questions, frustrations and anger and positive, righteous indignation should be directed towards those in decision-making positions. And so without wanting to emphasise that perhaps too delicately, I think that is key. We all need to stand together. And today we're fighting the cuts. We're fighting the pernicious cuts on some of the most vulnerable in our society. Tomorrow we might be campaigning for fairer social security contributions for small businesses. We may be fighting for a better education system. We will be and continue to fight for a protection of our public services so that we can all enjoy good education, hospitals, roads, etc., without those necessarily being privatised and without profit being the motive. All those things will come and are being done already. But tonight we focus on those who have been affected by the recent round of cuts. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Leslie. Give him a warm welcome and round of applause for the courage that
To me, when I've got mental illness, it's called bipolar, and a terrible illness to live with. And when I received that letter that Saturday morning or Friday morning, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't get hold of any of my healthcare assistants or anybody in the mental health service. So the first thing I thought was Monty. And again, he helped me. And there's many people are in the same position. And for someone with my illness to get a letter like that, it devastates you. You know? Not a lot more I can say, but the only thing I can say is I hope that people like you and these politicians are going to do what they can for us. You know?
What did the letter say?
It just said, well, I had a letter a week previous to that, or 7 weeks previous to that, I mean, and it said, which I expected, because my invalidity benefit had gone up by £4, they'd be putting my rent up by an extra £2 and dropping my income support by £2, which I wouldn't gain anything, because I realised that would happen anyway, you know. And then about 7 weeks later, I got this letter on the Friday saying that they're going to drop by £12 income support, which means that my rent will be up by £12 a week, which is nearly £600 a year. You know, I said in the paper that feeds my dog for a year. That's £600. So I'm going to have to cut back £600. What am I going to do with it? I don't know. You know.
Thanks, Leslie. And I think that's the point, if you can hear me from here, is that £600 is obviously a lot to Leslie, so he's being made worse off by £600 a year. And as he said, he's not alone. The £12 figure is something that we hear quite a lot, and I don't think anyone's